question. Are you running for governor? Campaign are you working on?
Well, you know, it's funny that you ask that because there are groups of people around the state who have been twisting my arm pretty hard to do that.
They want a non-Madison, non-Milwaukee.
And you know, I think what's interesting is that some of them are in La Crosse, some of them are in Green Bay, some of them are in the Minocqua Rhinelander area, some are in the Wisconsin Dells area. And they've started talking to each other. And they've come to me and they've said that you've got to do this. And I think the reason is because they really want to get out of the boxes that we've been in. And my initial response to them is that's really a crazy idea. The curious thing is that seemed to make them like the idea more. And they've actually taken a letter urging me to run. And they've been gathering a whole bunch of signatures, and they're going to go public with it on Wednesday.
Well, good.
I think this is a sure sign that we live in desperate times.
When I was a student in law school, I had on my email, "We are the change that we are waiting for." And I was emailing other parents and said, "Who are we going to run for the school board?" And it took about 10 seconds for them to say it's you. And so I took that responsibility. So
Good for
if you're
you.
telling us.
And you know what inspires me so much about what these people are doing is that, and you know, I was kind of confounded because I told them, well, that's a really stupid idea. And that made them like the idea more. And the more they sensed any sense of reluctance, they said, but Mike, that's exactly why we find you appealing. Is because you haven't spent your whole life trying to run for or hold office. And the thing that was inspiring about this to me, and why I feel an obligation to give them serious consideration of what they're asking, is that here's a bunch of people who are not movers and shakers.
Right.
They're not political people. They are people who are out there earning a living. Some are running businesses, some are working for this employer or that employer. And they have been sitting on the couch. And they have apparently reached a breaking point where they feel like, you know what? We've been through this drill so many times before. We wait for the party to tell us who we can support, and we're not going to wait anymore. We're going to take matters into our own hands. And I think the fact that they're looking for somebody who breaks the mold has led them to my doorstep, and so they've started twisting my arm. I don't know where all this is going to lead, but I have told them now.
Pretty quick.
I've told them now that I'm willing if people want this to happen.
It was not answer expected, but I like it.
Yeah.
I don't envy, anybody who's sitting on a county board or a town board.
Tough job.
Yeah, tough job.
Yeah.
Was facing some of the things I've heard about today, like bad water coming out of the taps at the town hall, or bumpy roads.
Yeah.
It seems, though, that a challenge, and I agree entirely about talking about proceeding with values entirely. But one of the huge challenges is to say that we live in a very different world. Values are just a different economic world. Now let me give an example. When I have vacation and drive over these much patched and narrow blacktop things and in rural areas. A lot of those were paved, in the 40s and 50s, right? I mean, it's been up there 50 years or so, and much patched. But it was paved in an era in which, frankly, government had, in some sense, more money than it has now, or that it's likely going to get. that we could make wishes about equity and tax structures and so on and so forth. But the fact is, government is shrunk. There's less resources. Now, assuming that the gravel road, the long-term maintenance costs of the gravel road are less than continuing on patching or repaving, God forbid, repaving these hundreds of miles, right? That's a reality that we need to face, okay? Am I trying to make a question out of this? I lost track, but you know. Everybody knows pretty well that I lost track. We've got to face these things.
Well, but we also have to face this. I would say this. We have to face the fact that in the height of the Great Depression, which was a far more challenging moment economically for this nation than the one we currently live in, we had a country that was incredibly ambitious about what America should be. And we had leaders who said, you know what, we should take electricity to every doorstep in America. And you think about that. Think about that. Rural electrification. Think about the incredible number of miles of roads, like the one I grew up on. There is electric wire going to every farmhouse and every barn all the way down those roads. And yet you can't get an internet connection and you can't get a mobile phone signal. We've stopped thinking about Wisconsin being first or best. We used to really take pride in the fact that Wisconsin was first. And this is a state of firsts. An awful lot of firsts. Social Security was invented here. Workers' compensation was invented here. Unemployment compensation was invented here. The nation's first system of vocational, technical, and adult education. This is a state that had a pioneering spirit, and we need to challenge ourselves to reestablish that pioneering spirit. We should be saying that if people poorer than us, who were in more dire economic straits than we are today, were willing to say every American should have electricity, then we should be saying every American should have access to high-speed internet and mobile phone service. Because those are just as much necessities in the 21st century as electricity was in the 20th. And I don't think we should ever be apologetic to that, and we should never trim our sails with the excuse that, but resources are more limited. People far poorer than us built a system of free public education all the way through high school. People who did not, most of them did not have high school diplomas when they built that system, but they knew their kids and grandkids would need it. And here we are, and my question to people in Wisconsin, is a high school diploma alone a sure path to the American dream today? Then that is the only answer we need to care about. If it is not a sure path to the American dream, then we have to commit ourselves, as past generations of Americans did, to creating that path to the American dream. And we can't be ashamed of that, to say that we should have debt-free education. That is a goal that we should have.
You started off by saying part of the problem is that progressives were the people who want to have more government, raise higher taxes.
That's what they say about you.
And what I think is that that's true. I think that given too many of the conservatives, they would like to see less taxes and they would like to see less government. The things that people have talked about here, we want to have a EPA that can actually go out and do a job. That's government, that's more government. We also want to have a military. We do not want North Korea to blow up San Francisco. We have to get our flowers in there. So I think more than anything else, what needs to happen is that we accept that there is suffering in the United States, in Wisconsin, in Eau Claire, and Chippewa County, and it's going to happen. We have perhaps a chance now with the Walker administration and the Trump administration to actually have things go to hell, and I think we should be supporting that. Actually, I'm serious. That there are, if you're looking at people who you want to be able to change what they think. Right now, they think less government is better, less taxes are better. They have to be ones that actually see suffering. They're probably not going to suffer themselves because rich people have stuff.
Yeah.
And middle-class successful people have stuff.
Yeah.
But there have to be enough people who actually go and see that something's happening, like Selma back in the 60s, that all of a sudden people saw it.
Mhm.
We have to have a Trump and a Walker and let them have suffering large enough to change. So when people say, we need to spend more money, we need to have more government, because that's actually going to make things better for everybody. And I think that
I agree with some of what you said, and I disagree with other parts. And so let me share a couple of thoughts. First of all, I don't think it's an effective argument to say we actually do need more government. I think what we have to say is how we need to put government to work in ways that actually will help solve the problems that we face. So the answer is not more government. The answer is putting government to work in the right ways to actually get us to a better place. You look at history, and the American people have been more than happy to tax themselves and more than happy to support a very expansive government when that government was creating Social Security or building the interstate highway system or doing rural electrification. When there was a purpose that government was put to, that people said, wow, now that would make our lives better, they were saying, where do we sign up? And people were willing to tax themselves in hard times to get us to those goals. And so what I would say is don't embrace the attitude. You can if you want, obviously. I would say, I plead, don't embrace the attitude of let's help them make things fall apart. While they are making things fall apart, let's be ambitious about the vision we provide people about the kind of state and the kind of country we can become and how we get there. And let's not say, shift the debate. Republicans have framed the debate as big government versus small government. We've got to shift that. We've got to change the whole way that debate has been set up. They ask the question in a way that gets them the answer they want. We've got to ask a different question. We've got to talk about how you put government to work in a way that actually makes people's lives better. And the last thought I'll share, it occurs to me that when government programs have been most supported, it's because those programs are ones where everyone pays and everyone benefits. In more recent times, there's been this tendency on the liberal side to want to target programs to help particular constituencies or particular groups in society. But think about Social Security. It has stood the test of time, and they've been trying to kill it ever since it was enacted. But Social Security is something where everybody has a stake. Everybody pays, everybody benefits. I think there's a secret in that. We've got to get back to putting government to work in ways that benefits everybody. That does it, because again, when we means test programs, when we try to target assistance to particular populations, that gives politicians like Scott Walker a golden opportunity served on a silver platter to divide and conquer segments of the population. He can go to people and say, your taxes are going to pay for them to get something you don't have. And doesn't that piss you off? And people go, yeah, that really ticks me off. I'm voting for Walker. I think a secret here is to get back to what I call the law of universality. What government does has to be done for the whole of society. Everyone pays and everyone benefits. If we can get back toward that ideal, which I think was the secret of the New Deal's success, It took a country in the throes of the Great Depression, and it lifted everybody up by doing things like Social Security, where everybody's got a stake. Nobody is paying but not ultimately benefiting. Now, where is Social Security's current challenge? It's that a whole bunch of young people think that they're going to pay but never benefit. That's what threatens Social Security. So let's be smart about how we go about making government a constructive force in our society. And I think a big key is to get back to that notion that what government does has to be done for the whole of society. And the more we can make government programs universal in their reach and universal in their impact, they will have support, just as the interstate highway had support, just as rural electrification and Social Security had tremendous support. That was government activism that the American people gladly embraced. And I think what we've got now is a situation where Democrats are seen as those who are favoring this group over here or that group over there, and Walker goes out to them and says, your taxes are paying for the money to get steered over here or over there, and you're getting the shaft, you're getting nothing. And that's the essence of divide and conquer politics. We've got to think our way around divide and conquer politics. And I think the blueprint is out there. There are lots of models of great, successful, enduring government programs that were supported and paid for willingly by the taxpayers because they felt they had a stake. And I gotta say, whether it's rural voters in general or working class people even more broadly, an awful lot of them are feeling forgotten. They're feeling like the economy's changing dramatically, I'm vulnerable here, nobody cares. And one party just wants to steer some help over somewhere else, and the other party's saying, well, at least we'll keep your taxes low. And so they figure, if the best I can do is keeping government small and my taxes down, I guess that's the best I can do. We can offer people a better offer than that.
Mike, I just have one comment and then a question. I met Mike a long time ago when he was in Madison, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Invited him up. I happened to be a county chair of the Democratic Party up in the Cyrus area at that time. He came all the way up from Madison. The county sheriff up there was a strong Republican, very conservative. And he invited anybody and everybody to come to listen to this man speak. And I kept trying the sheriff, who I got to know pretty well up there, and I said, you're going to come and listen. Well, they're in the middle of a major drug bust, as I learned later. But he came in, the sheriff. I thought he was going to be in there for 4 or 5 minutes. Over an hour later, he left. And on the way out, he came over to me and said, every person in the state of Wisconsin needs to hear this man. What the hell took him so long?
Well, it wasn't that I wasn't interested in talking to people. I just never saw myself in the role of being a candidate. I spent 15 years running the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and tracking money and shining light on those transactions that I consider to be the equivalent of legal bribery, by the way. And I'm talking to people like Jeff, who was willing to talk to me about whether we could do something about it. And he was like the only one who was willing to actually talk with me. All the rest of them, were like allergic to that message that we should actually do something about money in politics. So I've been committed to this kind of work for a long time. I never saw myself in the role of a candidate. It was never my plan. And I, every once in a while I'd have people come up to me and say, you should run for this or you should run for that. And I would say no, and they would take no for an answer. The fascinating thing is that there are these people now who aren't taking no for an answer. They're really trying to push through that. So this is a weird time that we're living in.
I don't want to put you on the spot, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but could you give me your personal opinion of Bernie Sanders?
Here's what I would say. If Bernie Sanders had been the Democratic nominee, he would be president. That's my assessment. I wrote a blog post back in August of 2015 saying that neither a Sanders nor a Trump presidency was that far-fetched of an idea. And my basic argument is that the way I looked at the political landscape, I thought it was a foregone conclusion that an anti-establishment populist was going to get elected president of the United States. It turned out only one party nominated one. Now, that party's establishment tried hard to prevent that from happening, but couldn't. The other party was more successful in heading that kind of thing off at the pass. But I think if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee, he would have won Wisconsin, he would have won Michigan, and he would have won Pennsylvania. He would have won in all the places that Hillary Clinton won. California or New York weren't going to go for Trump. But I think
Why did he lose them in the, why did he lose the primary then?
Well, but I think you have to remember that he was 50 points down in the national polls when he started, and it took him almost to the end to draw even with the presumptive Democratic nominee. Everybody said he can't win, he can't win. I actually think the biggest reason why he didn't win is all of the Democratic voters I ran into who were saying before the election that they thought that Bernie Sanders was too risky a choice. My take on it was that the risky choice was actually going with an establishment figure in such an anti-establishment moment. And I had people say, look, they would have run $200 million worth of ads calling him a socialist. My answer to that was, and that would have helped him in this particular environment. Now, the people who were not going to vote for a socialist weren't going to vote for him anyway, but it would have spiked millennial turnout. It would have won over some of the working class voters who ended up going to Trump in places like Michigan and Wisconsin. So whether you like him or don't like him, however you feel about him, my honest assessment is that if he had been the nominee, he would be president. And it was going to be an anti-establishment populist. And one of the things that I've heard Democrats say is that, well, he wasn't a Democrat. But that was one of his greatest assets. And I'll tell you this, the best thing that the Democratic Party could do in 2018 is nominate somebody who is not a Democrat.
Right.
Because I'll tell you, you get outside of Madison and Milwaukee and maybe a few other cities, and the word Democrat has become a curse word. You ask people how they feel about Democrats, and the answers are ugly. Bernie, everybody looked at him and said, he's no Democrat. He's not like just your average Democrat. So they saw a possibility of independence. They saw a possibility of somebody who was willing to break the mold, and voters desperately want the mold broken. And I actually think that that's a big part of what's pushing these groups to push me, is that they're looking for something that breaks the mold. They figure what we're going to be given is either sort of a long-time insider who's worked the vineyards for years, or somebody who's a rich business person.
Right.
And they're thinking, we don't want to wait for that. We're going to take matters into our own hands. And I think Bernie was able to tap into something that got him way farther than he expected to get. He didn't expect to close that gap of 50 points in the polls. And I'm not making that up. I actually talked with Larry Cohen, who was a key campaign aide to Bernie Sanders. And when Bernie announced, and Larry was weighing whether to jump in and help the campaign or not, Larry told me this. Bernie took him by the arm and he says, I'm not going to win the presidency. He didn't expect to get as far as he got, or as close as he got. I think an awful lot of people misread the landscape, including Republican insiders who didn't understand what Trump was tapping into. I heard so many Republicans say, when I wrote that blog post, I had Republican insiders at the Capitol saying, Trump is not going to be our nominee. That is, you are spreading fairy dust. That is fantasy. He will not be our nominee, until he was. And then they all said, he's not gonna get elected president. That is not possible, until he did. And I think a whole lot of people misread the moment and misread the landscape. So yeah, I think my personal view is that if he had been the nominee, he'd be president. I could be wrong.
I have an idea, of getting back to your notion of Democrats are not able to pronounce their values. And I'm thinking of two themes that we find in the American spirit. That theme of the rugged individualism and that theme of community association. So the story you tell about your neighbor who came and helped you that day, that was an expression of the community.
Exactly.
And the stories that you were just telling about, or your hopes for the future of Wisconsin, has the state of Wisconsin seen as that's my community,
Yeah.
that I want to thrive.
Yeah.
And so we have these two themes. But if we lose, or if we downplay the values of the community, which is what it seems to have happened, then ultimately that theme of rugged individualism takes precedence.
It does.
And then people want to defend themselves. I don't want a big government. I don't want to pay taxes. I want to have a free market. I want to have security so that
I'll take care of myself.
I'll take care of myself. And so you have that theme that's dominating in our spirit, in the propaganda.
Wonderfully said. And I think that it boils down to just that.
Mm-hmm.
That was wonderfully expressed. Because what has happened is that rugged individualist narrative has become the dominant narrative.
Right.
Because of an absence of an alternative narrative.
And
Those stories about Les Sturz or the barn raisings, and you've all got them in your past somewhere. There's something about your own personal story that you can draw from that are those kinds of stories. What those stories are is they seem to have a magical effect, but what they really are doing is exactly what you said. They're creating an alternative narrative, filling a vacuum that has developed. That's what we should be doing. All of us. We should be thinking about not stocking up on more facts and more data and figuring if we just stuff a little bit more down their throats, they'll finally see that we're right. No, we've got to be able to speak to the heart with an alternative narrative.
Another thing that happens, Mike, is if you're strong into that rugged determinism or rugged individualism, bring myself up my own bootstraps, and you're down and out, and now you get some help from the government, you don't appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
You regret it. And so then somebody like our speaker can say, we have to have mercy on these people by taking away that handout because they failed. Their ambition to do it on my own, I wasn't able, and I'm a failure. And because the handout is there, the security is there, it makes me feel less successful.
One of the interesting things to me is how even when Republicans were sweeping our state, winning state legislative seats and congressional seats and the governor's office, there was a statewide referendum at one point about raising the minimum wage. And it got a really strong, an overwhelmingly strong bipartisan vote of support, even when Republicans were winning. And I think there is a situation where people are responding to this idea that, yeah, work should pay. When you work, you should actually be able to make it. And that's the exact kind of policy that people can look at and say, you know what? That would be good for all of us, because that's the kind of thing that could prevent people from needing